We're going to get started with our presentation tonight. My name is Eric Hayden. I'm a meteorologist with the Weather Service in Newport. We're out on Roberts Road, so we certainly cover Cape Carteret. I'm actually somebody that lives in Cape Carteret, so this is a fond presentation for me. To my bottom or left, depending on how you see this, is Zach Saffir. He's the town manager, and he's going to talk here in a second about some town-specific things for hurricane preparedness. Before we get to Zach's presentation, your microphones have been muted, so you don't have to worry about any background noise or doing anything. If you can see me, see Zach, and hear our presentation and see the presentation, you're good to go. I'm looking at it on the right, so we shouldn't have any technical issues. At the end, we're going to do a Q&A. So at any point, if you have a question, you can go ahead and ask that question via the question tab. All you need to do is ask that. I will see it, and Zach and I will ask those questions and answer them at the end. So if it pops up in your head, go ahead and ask that during the presentation. It won't bother us. We will certainly tackle all those at the end. If you would like to speak, you can raise your hand. At the Q&A part, I will call on you. I will unmute your microphone, and you can ask that question verbally. I mentioned that we'll provide this talk as a PDF. I didn't get a chance to upload it to the handout section. No problem. I have all your emails. I will email you with a class follow-up or form follow-up, a PDF copy of this talk, and a link to the YouTube recording. So if any of you join late, need to skip out, we'll certainly be able to make sure that you get the presentation in full so that you can see it. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Zach. He's going to give some town-specific information, and then after his presentation, we're going to do the Weather Service part, where we talk a little bit about hurricanes and tropical systems and all the things you should be doing to prepare this hurricane season, because we certainly have a long way to go. So Zach, your presentation is looking good. I'll fade to the background, and then I'll take back over when you're all set. So the floor is yours.
All righty, let's see. I'm making so I can see the presentation here. Okay, there we go. Eric, can you hear me all right?
Yep, see you and hear you perfect.
All right, good deal. So I'm just going to run through some Cape Carteret specific information about hurricanes. Definitely a timely presentation today with approaching the height or the statistical height of hurricane season. So glad we're able to do this today and to kind of talk through some of these things. You know, a big part of what we do is we kind of keep track during these hurricane events. And we have some good examples that we're going to share this evening. This was back in Hurricane Florence on Lejeune Road. And you can see what it typically looks like on a typical dry day when we're not having a hurricane, as compared to with the storm surge inundation that we saw during Hurricane Florence. So that's one thing we do is we take a lot of pictures during the event. We use that to kind of gauge the amount of storm surge. And then we like to compare that storm surge to some of the flood risk information maps, and I'll get to those in just a moment. Here's at the end of Manatee Street. This is actually where the town boat ramp is located. So this is another shot from Hurricane Florence, and you can see as a reference point that telephone pole there in the middle. You can see it there in the bottom and see about what the storm surge inundation was on that storm. So really some good information. We have these pictures from each storm event, so it gives us a good idea about how far up the storm surge is going to come, and then we can compare it to what the models show us. So for instance, this is looking down there at the boat ramp. This is the flood risk information system. It's publicly available. If you just go to Google and type in FRIS, you can find out what your flood zone is. And in reality, we're actually seeing a lot of where these flood zone extents are line up with where the actual storm surge inundation is. So a really useful tool. If you don't know what flood zone you're in, we definitely encourage you to utilize this as a resource. It's something that we use all the time in Cape Carteret, and it's really helpful to compare it from storm to storm. And it's actually really interesting to see just how far the storm surge comes in and how that compares to the actual models and maps. We also look at the National Storm Surge Hazard Maps, and that's another good resource that is out there. And you can look at, based on the category, what your level of storm surge inundation may be. So right now it's just showing a category 1. It goes all the way up to a category 5. So a good sort of planning tool to have an idea for what possible storm surge inundation we might see. In Cape Carteret, we have a lot of low-lying areas. So it's really important that, you know, we stress this and we talk about this when we're talking about hurricanes, because that's one of the biggest impacts is flooding and storm surge inundation during those storm events. And then looking back at Florence, and while we talk about storm surge and why it's so important, this is the harbor light that is no longer there, but this kind of shows just the amount of debris that comes in during a storm surge event and is deposited when those waters recede. And you can see there in the picture on the right, that's actually inside the harbor light, and that shows you about how high the storm surge came through there and just knocked out the drywall and everything else. So really some useful information that helps us from a planning perspective, but it's also helpful to see that and helpful to kind of put a picture with those maps that show where the storm surge comes through. And we also keep track of other events. This was a semi-tropical event back in June of 2020 where we had some significant rainfall that happened in a really short period of time. We have a weather station at Town Hall where we track rainfall intensity. You can see the graph there on the left. We were at an intensity of around 7 inches an hour, according to that station. So we saw a really significant amount. So you can see over off of Bogue Sound Drive, the kind of stormwater accumulation we got. And then once that water had receded, you can see just how much washout we got there on the side of Bogue Sound Drive. You can see some flooding over off of Sutton Place. So it's really helpful for us. We kind of keep track. We know about what a certain rainfall event will do in terms of flooding, and that's helpful from a planning perspective, and then also when we're staging pumps and other resources. So I like to share that and kind of talk through that. This was not even a named tropical storm or system, but there was just some training moisture that continued to come off of the Atlantic, and it really came down hard on us back in June of 2020. So we're seeing those events more and more frequently, so definitely want people to be prepared and be aware of that. And you know, if you live down here in Eastern North Carolina, you're no stranger to the stormwater issues and flooding that we see. So just something to keep in mind, and especially as we're talking about hurricanes and tropical systems. Want to give everybody kind of a picture of what the EOC looks like at Town Hall during the storm. During a storm event, we have myself and the police department and the public works department there throughout the storm. So this is kind of our base camp that we operate out of. We have different resources pulled up. And this is kind of our central operation. We sleep here, eat here, and work out of this EOC. So we keep track of what's going on throughout the town. We have different camera shots throughout the town. And then we're also going out when it's safe to do so and evaluate how much storm surge we're seeing, flooding issues throughout the town, trying to keep the roads cleared, removing debris when it's safe to do so. So just to give a little snapshot inside what it's like inside the storm and what we're doing there in Town Hall. And this is the most recent storm event of significance for us, which was Hurricane Isaias last August. This is here at the end of Easy Street there on the left, and then also looking down at the boat ramp down at the end of Manitou Street. And it's pretty amazing because just within the course of an hour, the storm surge with the tide had come a pretty good distance up Easy Street. So you can see with the wood that was deposited there in the rack line, and within an hour had pulled all the way back out to the Sound. And if you're looking at this picture, the Sound would be on the other side of those white fence posts there. So you know, it's interesting to be able to see this. Like I said, keeping track of it over time. You know, we know what a typical, you know, if it's hitting on a high tide and what kind of storm surge we might see, what kind of impacts and who might be affected by that. So we know what areas to monitor and what areas we might have to respond to and address. So it's a really helpful sort of resource from storm to storm, all these pictures and information that we gather from one storm event to the next. And then just want to mention, this is the weather station that I talked about earlier that's at the Town Hall. So that's our weather station ID up there, the KNC Cape C15. That's right there in the community park next to Town Hall. So that's a good resource if you're looking for local weather conditions in Cape Carteret. We do have that resource available. And also want to mention, throughout the storm event, we post on social media. We have an email list server. We send out information. So if you're interested in signing up to receive those alerts and to receive that information throughout the storm, go to townofcapecarteret.org. Right there on the homepage, there at the bottom, there's a sign-up form where you can put in your information, sign up for inclement weather updates, and you can receive updates throughout the storm and from the town in preparation for the storm. So a good resource there and a good way to stay informed of what's going on. But that's pretty much all I have this evening. You know, during hurricane season, we're constantly watching any new development and watching what's going on in the Gulf and out in the Atlantic. So watching that little tropical storm that's forming up right now in the Gulf and keeping our eyes on that. But That's one thing we're constantly vigilant throughout hurricane season, and we do a lot to kind of prepare for storms. So we have a great partnership with the National Weather Service. Really appreciate everything that Eric does, and it's great to have such a great community partner in the National Weather Service to discuss these events, to hold these types of events like we're doing today and throughout the year. So I'll hand it back over to Eric, and if y'all have any questions, be happy to answer them at the end of the presentation.
That was great, Zach. Really appreciate it. And again, I mentioned at the beginning, I live in Cape Carteret, so I'm excited to see how much the town does with regards to weather. And he showed you, we have a lot of low-lying areas along the Sound and the White Oak River, so it can really be impacted. We're going to follow up on what Zach said about storm surge and talk about some different things from the Weather Service perspective. So appreciate everybody joining us. I know we have a few folks that are just starting to join us. A few folks have logged on and logged back in. Maybe you had a technical issue. It's no worry at all, because all this is being recorded. So just kind of sit back and watch the presentation. If you have to drop out or if you have any issues, we're certainly going to go ahead and do a recording of these so that you can watch it afterwards. So my name is Eric Hayden. I'm a meteorologist with the local office for the Weather Service, just down the road from everybody in Newport. This presentation is going to talk about hurricane preparedness, why we should be preparing for hurricane season, even though we're well into the month of September. And we're going to talk especially about water in terms of potential impact to yourself and also your property. I mentioned the technical aspects. All of this is being recorded. You're able to ask any questions through the question feature, and we will take those questions at the end. I mentioned that I work for the local Weather Service office in Newport, Morehead City. So we're just down here at this red dot, so the kind of the central to east central part of Carteret County. We're responsible for all of eastern North Carolina for this area shaded in yellow. So if you've been to the Outer Banks, you've been to Emerald Isle, Greenville, Jacksonville, Snow Hill, that is our area of coverage. And that does include the waterways. So if you've ever been out on Bogue Sound or into the ocean, you've probably looked at a forecast. We have done those forecasts for you. Down to our south, Wilmington covers this area of North Carolina. Raleigh covers the central part of the state. And then the Wakefield or Richmond office covers the far northeastern part of the state. Our main responsibility is watches, warnings, and advisories. So we do a 7-day forecast. We tell you, hopefully we'll get some rain later tonight. We do the day-to-day forecast, but our bread and butter are those alerts you get on the phone. Perhaps you see them on TV, warning of hurricanes, flooding, severe weather, things of that magnitude. Zach mentioned that Cape Carteret has an EOC and is staffed for severe weather. We are staffed 24/7 all the time, even if the weather's not crazy. So if you were to visit us, we have at least 2 people in the building at all times. So a weekend or a holiday or maybe an overnight shift, we're not staffed very much. If it's Florence, like you see right here, everybody's there. All the people pictured are working. All the people that you don't see are sleeping elsewhere in the building. So we're a fortified building. We're up high. It's a brick building, and we have hurricane shutters. We have a generator for backup power, and we're prepared to stay for the storm itself. So no matter what, we stay. Much like police and fire and first responders, I can't be there 24/7 working, so we do shifts, a day shift, an evening shift, and an overnight shift to cover that. We have just over 20 people. Most are meteorologists, but we have a lot of support staff, folks maintaining our computers, our equipment, our building, things like that. So we have a lot of folks at that local office. I should mention that we're the Newport office, but I mentioned Raleigh and Wakefield and Wilmington. There's over 100 offices in the country. So you have a lot of local offices working for you, no matter where you're watching this presentation from. One thing I want you to get out of this is our website. It's great, great information. We're part of the federal government. We fall under the Department of Commerce and NOAA. You have paid for this website. This is your tax money at work. Please bookmark this. If you just remember weather.gov, weather.gov, and then you can click on Eastern North Carolina, or you can bookmark by putting /Morehead City. The reason why I mentioned weather.gov is if you go up to West Virginia for vacation, you go down to Florida, you go out west. If you just go to weather.gov, you can click anywhere in the country. And I mentioned that we have over 100 offices. You'll get that localized forecast from the local office itself. Once you bookmark it, I encourage you to zoom in on the map itself and bookmark your location. And I'm going to do a website tutorial here in a second to show you what I mean by that. So you can find us on the internet, weather.gov/Morehead City. We're all over social media, whether you have Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, or YouTube. If you just search NWS Morehead City, you can find us. What is great about social media? Our website is very good, very, very detailed, but it's probably best to bookmark it and know the website. There's a lot of information. Sometimes it doesn't scream, hey, you need to be paying attention to the storm as much as social media. This is a tweet that I did right before Florence. We were very concerned. Florence was a Category 4 storm and it was well respected, but as the category decreased, we thought folks might be letting their guard down. And we're going to talk here in a second why category is just part of the puzzle. So we wanted to make sure people knew that storm surge and rain was still going to be a big deal. And this is YouTube. This is where we post video briefings. This is where we're going to post this recording of the class. So we really like social media to kind of cut through the noise and to talk about what is coming up, what you should be focused on. If you've watched our social media since last week, we've talked about Larry. Hurricane Larry, that's well out to sea. Very, very concerned with the rip current risk this week, and we've been promoting that through the weekend via social media. So this slide I show every hurricane talk. If you saw me in April, May, June, August, this month, the time to prepare is now. You might say, well, Eric, you know, I'm new to the area. We're already well into September. It looks like we're going to escape this year unscathed. Not so fast. This is a graphic that shows the peak of the hurricane season. The orange is a graph showing hurricanes and tropical storms, and the yellow is just hurricanes. So you can see kind of slow May, June, July, August, but once August 1st comes around, huge ramp up in terms of frequency of storms in the Atlantic Basin where we get our storms. Right around September 10th, so coming up for the peak, that means we're not done yet. We still have a long way to go in terms of hurricane season. So when I give this talk in September, I talk about names like Matthew and Sandy. Those are all storms that have happened after today's date. When I give this presentation in May, I talk that we can get storms as early as May. We had it last year with Arthur. So please keep that in mind. If you're a new resident or even if you've been here for a while, you really should be thinking about hurricane season from May well into through the month of October, because we can get storms any time of the month around here, those months I just mentioned. The big ones, yes, they typically occur in a window kind of from mid-August to the first part of October. So please keep that in mind. I'm mentioning this because you might say, well, Eric, you know, I already knew this. We have a great area. A lot of people continue to move to our area. Tell them about this. They may be from Ohio or Pennsylvania, and they may not have a lot of experience with tropical weather. And think about it, once the summer's over, we're back in school and work is picking up, you might think that we're through the season, and that is not the case. So please help us spread that word about that. Zach showed some great graphics about storm surge inundation, and there's just a ton of resources out there. This is kind of homework for you. These are things you should be playing around with and looking to see what your vulnerability is to where you live in terms of hurricanes. One good stop place you should go is our website. It's weather.gov/Morehead City. There's links on the page, but if you just add in hurricane prep, you can get a lot of good information. This is modeled after Hurricane Week, which is in May. So we talk about evacuations. We talk about what you should have in your hurricane kit. We talk about what you should plan to do in terms of if you're ordered to evacuate. So really, really good website for that. I'm going to take this opportunity just to jump out of this presentation and show you that website that I have preloaded. So this is our website, weather.gov. I'll just show you a quick forecast. Again, once you get to the page itself, you can enter the zip code, or you could just click on the map. So I'm going to cheat and click on Western Carteret County and get as close as we can to Cape Carteret. So here's our local current conditions, so whatever the closest airport is. So for us, it's Cherry Point. Here's our forecast for 3 miles north of Cape Carteret. Again, a 60% chance of rain tomorrow. I'm a big time gardener, so I'm hoping we actually get the rain. So this is our forecast over the next couple days. And then there's a text forecast that's very, very detailed. The thing I want to show you is this Google-based map shows you where the forecast is valid for. So I'm going to zoom in, and this is valid just north of the Gulf club, more toward Pelletier. Let's say you live closer to what Zach was showing you in terms of some of that flooding that occurs along Bogue Sound. I'm going to click there, and we don't have a lot of elevation change in our area with regards to weather, so it's not going to be a totally different forecast, still 60% chance of rain. But what's nice about this is you can bookmark it for your area. If you live on Emerald Isle, if you live closer to the water, you know that it's hard to get above 90 degrees in the summertime. That will be because of the water. That will be reflected in this forecast. So it's just a great website to bookmark and save for your forecast details. I mentioned the preparedness page, hurricane prep. So again, this is broken down into different days. First day is about determining your risk. Zach was showing you some of the maps. If you live by the water, if you live in an area that's prone to flooding, your hurricane plan is going to be different. It's going to include that you might need to leave the area. If you live in the Star Hill neighborhood, you're very, very high and you don't have proximity to water, if you haven't had issues in the past, you might not need to leave the area. You might have to prepare to stay for a week or 10 days. So your vulnerability is going to determine what you need to do, and that's an individual by individual determination. On day 2, we have information about evacuation plans. The other site I want to mention, Zach mentioned the storm surge that can show what happens with a Cat 1 or Cat 2. He mentioned the North Carolina flood maps. They are awesome. It's all based on elevation. When I bought my home, I looked to see where it flooded and where it didn't. And I bought a home where we were up high and we didn't have, hopefully, no water issues. So that's a good resource. Another one is Know Your Zone. If you just Google Know Your Zone North Carolina, it will come up. This started just about a year ago. And what this is you can find out exactly where you live in the county, and you could be watching from Craven or Onslow. I know we've got some folks on from across the area, and you can see what your vulnerability is based on evacuation zone. So for example, I'll pick on Cape Carteret and Carteret County area because that's the focus of this talk. There's 3 different zones. The first zone, the most vulnerable, of course, is Bogue Bank, so Pine Knoll Shores, Emerald Isle, and then down east Carteret County. The second most vulnerable area, and sometimes it's just as vulnerable as Zach showed from those pictures, is south of Highway 24. And again, the flood map that he showed will have a little more detail because some folks toward Highway 24 are much higher in elevation versus folks right along the sound itself. But this would be the second zone of evacuation. So when local officials say for this zone to evacuate, that's what they mean by that. So a lot of good information. Again, that's on our website. And the whole point of this presentation is to start the discussion. We don't expect you to pick up everything today. For some of you, this might be the first time you see it. You will have access to Zach. Zach is all over the town. His contact information is out there. You'll have my email. If you have any questions after you see the recording or you see this, please ask us. We certainly want you to get all the information that you can. Last thing I'm going to mention about our website, and we're going to move on. We do send out briefings when there's really bad weather. So the past couple of days, we've done briefings on the rip currents and also coastal flooding. We're getting some overwash, especially on the Outer Banks. That is on our website. If you scroll to the bottom, you can click on the weather hazard briefing. And we also post videos of these briefings on YouTube. So the whole point of that first part of the presentation, weather.gov/Morehead City, there's a ton of information from preparedness to the actual forecast that is at your fingertips. The next couple slides are going to talk about the forecast. We get a lot of questions in the office. Do we look at the European model? What models do we look at? Have you ever looked at the spaghetti models? I know you've all seen those, especially on TV, showing all the different tracks that a potential storm can take. And what I really want to refocus you on is the men and women down at the Hurricane Center, the official forecast of the Weather Service and the Hurricane Center. You might say, well, Eric, you're just saying that because you work for the Weather Service. I want to back it up with some science and to show you the statistics on how good the Hurricane Center is, some places we struggle, and things to keep in mind when you're doing your hurricane planning. So this is the spaghetti model on the left. It shows a storm on the right, and then on the left, it shows all the various tracks toward the coastline of the United States. It has some utility. Where the lines are spread out means we're less confident because there's a lot of things that could happen. Where the lines are overlapped, it means that the cluster of possibility is very similar, so our confidence is very high. The problem with this is you just look at it and you're focused on just your area and just the one line that hits you or the lines going out to sea. It can change model run by model run, and I want you to focus on the official forecast because we're looking at all of those possible solutions, and then with a human, we have input to make small, subtle changes. And the reason why I say that is for some storms, it's going to hit Charleston. Oh, it's going to hit the Outer Banks. It's going to hit Wilmington. What good does that help if each model run changes? And we call it the windshield wiper effect, back and forth, back and forth. Whereas the Hurricane Center will look at all of the models available, and they will make slight adjustments to the track. If we see something changing, we'll slightly adjust it. So if it comes back, we're not going back and forth. So please, 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 you can help us on social media. I know you've seen it weeks out. It just drives me crazy. I saw it this summer. People will post one model run showing a Category 2 storm hitting North Carolina, and that is correct at that time for that one model. It's not misinformation. That's true what they're posting. But the story behind it is it's likely to change, and it's just one outcome or one possibility. It's better to look at the official source that takes into all of that account. So you can help us out by sharing those graphics online. When you see them, please share the Hurricane Center graphics. They are the most accurate. Why do I say that? Look how far we've come. So 1999, Hurricane Floyd was certainly a big storm here in eastern North Carolina. Back then, I know Zach wasn't a town manager then, and I certainly wasn't in the weather service at that point. But back then, if I were to speak to Zach as a town manager, I would say 3 days out with Hurricane Floyd, the storm could hit somewhere in the Carolinas, from eastern Georgia, anywhere in South Carolina, North Carolina, or Virginia. That was our average error back in 99, 3 days out. Large error for where the center of the storm will go. Go to 2019. Zach is now town manager. We can say that the center of Dorian should pass somewhere over southeastern North Carolina, specifically near the Wilmington area. So the error has gotten much smaller. You'll notice, you've noticed this already, I'm sure. We knew about Florence days out. It was just kind of waiting for it to actually get here, especially with larger storms and more intense storms. The accuracy is really improving. With storms that are barely a tropical storm, sometimes they can make funny movements because since they're weaker, they can be steered off in other directions by other weather patterns, where these more potent storms kind of have a more definite track. So we've certainly improved with track forecasting, and you've probably noticed it through the years. The accuracy has really improved. This is a graph showing error and consistency. So you go back to that spaghetti model plot I showed. Again, I've seen 2 posts already this year, going back this summer, talking about a huge hurricane hitting North Carolina 10 days out. It does not do us any good. It's not a consistent forecast. It's good to be, accurate, but you also want to be consistent. If you just get that one storm right, but all the other ones wrong, you're getting a lot of people worked up over things they don't need to be worked up about. So on this plot, on the x-axis on the bottom is consistency. You want to be as little miles of error as possible. So 50 miles is very low error. If you're off by 150 miles, that's a lot of error. On the y-axis is the difference as well in terms of error in miles. So on this graph are the various models, GFS, the European model, and NHC. You want to be really consistent with the track itself, but you also don't want to have any error with the track. And so you want to be in this lower left-hand side of the graph, low error and very consistent. So not only the forecast was accurate, but the forecast track itself didn't change very much from forecast to forecast. So just trying to show that not only is the forecast very accurate, it's very consistent. You'll see subtle changes, and you might have noticed that with Ida. I mean, just an amazing storm and a very accurate forecast. One thing I do want to point out, as good as we've gotten at forecasting storms, a little wiggle is going to make a huge difference. And this is why you cannot wait until the end to evacuate. Listen to local officials. If you're in an evacuation zone and you're vulnerable, you need to leave. If you're going to stay, you need to be prepared for 7 days to be on your own, because we really don't know the very end of what's going to happen until it's right upon us. So it can be an accurate forecast, but a little change by 5 or 10 miles, you know, for us, let's just talk about Cape Carteret. If the storm hits Jacksonville or Swansboro, we're on that right side, the worst side of the storm with Florence. If it hits Pineville Shores or Morehead City, our impact's going to be a lot less, and that is not a big difference. Driving down Highway 24, that's very, very little. And that's what this graph is trying to show. This is Laura last year, a very, very powerful hurricane. The actual track of Laura is right here in purple. And then the dotted line is the simulated track 20 miles farther west. So that's like Jacksonville to Cape Carteret, you know, not very far. So they ran a simulation. What if the storm was 20 miles farther to the west? What would happen? What would happen is this red area right here would have 10 to 15 feet higher of storm surge. This kind of pink salmon color would have 5 to 10 feet higher of storm surge. So again, point that out. Say we're, you know, Cape Carteret. The storm, instead of hitting to our east, it hits Jacksonville. We have, you know, feet higher of storm surge because of that small wiggle. So the forecast can be accurate, but those little changes at the end make all the difference in the world. So please, when the local officials issue evacuation orders, when we issue storm surge forecasts, it's planning for the worst case scenario. A lot of people are going to be okay, which is great. Some people are not. And we would rather you be able to come back and fix up your home, clean up your property, than not be with us. So please take that serious, especially with regards to water. A couple more graphics, then we're going to get into the impacts of any storm. The Hurricane Center is a great website, hurricanes.gov. This is a tropical weather outlook. This is issued 4 times a day. And this just shows potential tropical storm activity, you know, moderate risk like orange, low risk in yellow, or actual storms. And this is a good heads up before we even have a named storm. Hey, I need to be paying attention. There's something out in the tropics. A lot of us look at this. You're probably very familiar with this hurricane forecast cone. If you've watched the last couple of years, the track has gotten more narrow. It is not based on storm size. It's not based on how large the storm is at all. It's based on error. And since we've gotten better, the error has shrunk in terms of the forecast cone. This does not show the impacts. It shows the most probable path for the center of the storm. So what I mean by that is this is Florence. Notice how the tropical storm force wind field extends beyond the path, and the hurricane winds almost extend beyond the path. This shows that the center of Florence is most likely to move somewhere in this cone. So at this point, it could be anywhere from Myrtle Beach up to almost Cape Hatteras. It is not a dot on the map. So please, if you're anywhere in the general vicinity of this, so at the time, if you lived in Florida or Georgia or South Carolina, doesn't mean you need to evacuate type of planning, means you need to pay attention. Storms are not a dot on a map. Florence hit down at Wrightsville Beach, but we were still impacted. Richmond, Virginia had tornadoes. They were still impacted. Hurricanes are hundreds of miles across. The cone just shows where we think the center will go. It doesn't show who's going to be impacted and who won't. So it's not a game of I'm in it, I should pay attention. I'm close to it, but out of it, I don't have to worry about it. A couple more good graphics. These are in our briefings and these are on the website. The earliest reasonable arrival time of tropical storm force winds. Sounds real fancy. All it means is in a worst case scenario, when do we think 39-mile-per-hour winds could get here? We pick those winds because that's about when emergency responders have trouble responding because of falling trees and dangers. That's about the wind speed when you should be inside and staying, or you should be out of the area. So that's a good, hey, if I'm done by this time with my planning to leave or finishing any preparations on my property, you're good to go. So in this example from Florence, I would say that the earliest the winds could get here would be sometime overnight on Wednesday. Again, worst case scenario gives you a buffer for any mistakes we make on the forecast. The most likely time is when we actually think it's going to happen. And this is from last May 2020, Tropical Storm Arthur just brushed our area. But again, in this case, the most likely time that the winds would get to eastern North Carolina would be sometime Monday morning. So those are very, very useful graphics for your planning. In the beginning, I wanted you to remember weather.gov/Morehead City. The second thing I want you to remember is do not focus on just the category. Do not just focus on the category of the storm. This Saffir-Simpson scale that you see, that you're very familiar with, is only a wind scale. It's important, it's part of the puzzle, but it's not the whole puzzle. If you've spent any amount of time in this area, you have heard the phrase, I'm not going to leave unless it's a 2. I'm not going to leave unless it's a 3. When people make those decisions just based on the category alone, they're going to find themselves in trouble because this scale doesn't show how much rain is going to fall. The scale doesn't show how large the storm is or if it's going to sit across us for days and days like Florence. It's important. It's to be respected. If we have a 4 headed our way, obviously that's a bad thing, but that is just related to wind. This scale doesn't show you where the storm will hit. Just like I mentioned, if a storm hits Swansboro, Jacksonville, just to our west, we are on the right side of the storm, much, much worse. If it hits Cape Lookout or it brushes out to sea, that's extremely close to our area, but we're on the left side of the storm and impacts will not be as bad. So don't focus on just a category and don't say, hey, you know, I've been through a Cat 1, 2, 3, or 4 before, I'll be fine. Last time wasn't that bad. There's a lot of factors, where it hit, how slow it was moving, how big was it. So what I want you to focus on is the impacts. Since 2010 through 2019, we've had a lot of just category 1s. Almost 200 people have died, and we've had over $100 billion in damage. Things like Matthew, Tropical Storm Hermine, Florence, Dorian. So again, a lot of category 1s that cause really bad things. You don't have to be a high category storm to cause issues. I'm going to back that up with more statistics with regards to all the impacts. When you think hurricanes, I know we think wind, and it is important, but I want you to think about rainfall flooding. What would that do to my neighborhood? Storm surge. Do I live in some of those areas that Zach showed along, you know, the shoreline in Cape Carteret? Do I live in downtown New Bern? Do I live on Ocracoke? Rip currents. Am I going to the beach? Wind, that is important, and also tornadoes, like we saw with Dorian in 2019 on Emerald Isle. So 1963 to 2012, water is what kills. About 90% of people during that time frame died because of water. Half were storm surge, about another third were rainfall flooding. So water, water, water is our issue in terms of death. What about recently? 2016 to 2018 hasn't changed a lot. About 83% are water related. We have made big strides with regards to storm surge. We'll talk about that in a second. Still to be respected. Zach showed you those pictures of the house, you know, the power of the water, but it's water, water, water. So when you're thinking about your vulnerability, do you live in a low-lying area? Have you ever been in a car and tried to drive through water? More than half of those that die are in vehicles. It's not that the water comes up and they're unexpected. It's they're going places they shouldn't. So please never cross a flooded road. Never try to drive through flooded roads. You don't even know, you don't know how strong or powerful the water is, and you don't know if that road is there. Zach showed those images of the road being scoured out. That can happen to the road itself. The road could be missing. So the water may only be a few feet deep, you know, most of the road, but where there is no road, it's going to be a lot deeper. So last year, 2020, 31 deaths related to water out of the 47. So again, from the 1960s to 2020, it's water, water, water. So think about that now, your vulnerability to rain and flooding. So Hurricane Florence, again, a good forecast. Here was the track. Forecasted 20 to 30 inches of rain across eastern North Carolina. This is what was observed, 20 to 30 inches of rain. but we still lost 17 people. 16 of those were in vehicles. So this is, again, where you can help us. Don't cross flooded roads. If you live in a low-lying area and officials are saying to evacuate, you need to evacuate. So that's rainfall flooding. Storm surge is a rapid rise of water. Zach showed the picture of the debris. The water was up, it came up, and then it just as quickly went down. This is an image that just still stuck in my mind of the boats into downtown New Bern, one of those hotels there down by the convention center, 8 to 11 feet of storm surge. It's still hard to imagine. I just crossed the Neuse River the other day, the Cherry Branch ferry. That's such a cool thing to be able to take that over to Pamlico County and Beaufort County. It's just amazing that water came up the Neuse River. It happened not as bad, but in Irene, northeast wind piled up all the water off the Pamlico Sound and then funneled it up the Neuse River. And then this is storm surge flooding in Ocracoke, very, very bad, 4 to 7 feet, and it happened in a matter of 15 minutes. Worst storm surge they have seen in recorded history. So really, really rapid rise of water, and that's where the concern of death is, because it's not one of those that you have time to leave at that point. You're kind of stuck where you are. A couple of years ago, we started doing storm surge watches and warnings. These are for low-lying areas that are usually dry, that are adjacent to water. You have a chance of 3 feet or higher of water. We also do maps. This is similar to what Zach showed. He showed as a planning purpose, simulated Cat 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's happening. It takes into some account some wiggle room. They take into account changes in intensity and wobbles. So this is a worst case scenario. This is up the Neuse River for Florence on the left, and on the right is what actually happened. So this is, when we do this forecast, not everybody's going to see this surge. It's a 10% chance, but this is what evacuations are based on, and what you should be planning for when you're deciding to leave or not. I still remember it wasn't Cape Carteret, Zach, but it was right, by Carolina Home and Garden, where the Sound, I forget if it's Goose Creek, but the little tributary there, about 3 feet of water on Highway 24, and there's some houses there. And I talked to the gentleman, and the reason why he left was because there was a prediction of 5 to 10 feet of storm surge. So please respect those values. These maps will kind of show you the 50,000 foot level. Hey, we expect 4 to 6 feet along the coast, and those other maps can show you inundation on a more specific level. So we talked about water, rain, flooding, and then also storm surge. The other one I want to talk to you about is distant hurricanes or storms that haven't made it quite to the coast yet, and rip currents. And you might say, well, Eric, this is a hurricane class. Who is swimming in a hurricane? I'm talking about storms that maybe never even hit us. What's happening now with Larry? Big storm. We've got huge waves crashing on our shore. These distant storms, they generate swell, and that swell goes somewhere. It doesn't just disappear. So in 2019, we lost more people due to Lorenzo than Dorian here locally. 4 people in the Carolinas died in rip currents. It was a nice October weekend. It's sunny out. It's not cloudy and storming. I'm going to get in the water. It's still in the 70s, probably, maybe near 80. Really, really nice. The messaging is there. We just have to make sure people are heeding the red flags and knowing what to do. So we started doing this a couple years ago. This is something similar that we put out on social media in our briefings with Larry. Rip current awareness from distant storms, or like in the case of Florence or Dorian, it may not get here until a Thursday or Friday, but as early as 2, 3, 4 days before, we have increased swell. So these are some general beach tips since we live by the beach. This is another: spread the message. You go to Emerald Isle, you go to Atlantic Beach, maybe Bear Island, you take the ferry over. These tips. Share them with people that are only down here once, 1 week out of the summer. Try to swim on a beach with a lifeguard. It's harder in the fall season because a lot of the students and kids are going back to school. Try to swim in pairs. Always have adult supervision, even if you're another adult. Pay attention to the flags. If they're red, don't get in the water. Don't become a victim. If I see my family member, somebody in the water, your natural instinct is to go out there, obviously. It's proven to be a better resource to call 911 and get the experts there and to throw them something. throw them a boogie board. I know in Emerald Isle they have the life-saving, like the little donuts there you can throw out. You don't need to be a quarterback, a Heisman quarterback, and throw it out to them. If you just put it in the water, since they're caught in a rip current, it is going to go out to them. The biggest deal with a rip current, you can direct them also where to go. If they're having trouble, you direct them left or right or parallel. It's a very narrow channel of water. Surfers love it. It's a break in the sandbar and it's a rush of water out. They like to take it out to the waves. It's something natural that occurs and is to be respected. But if you know to not fight it and to swim parallel, you can survive a rip current. You just have to know what to do. So please help us get out that messaging. This is an example of what we put on social media. And we try to work with our inland offices, because not to pick on Ohio or Pennsylvania or New Jersey or even Raleigh, a lot of our deaths at the beach have been from people outside of the area. So anything you can do to get that messaging out, that would be greatly appreciated. So as we wrap things up here, you'll notice I do talk about wind. This is some damage we saw in the Cape Carteret area, the picture in the background. Wind is obviously a threat. You can cause, have power outages, blocked routes to leave. There is a danger with trees landing on your home, but traditionally, again, it usually counts to less than 10% of the deaths are associated with wind. One more point on the category of the storm. If you were around 7 years ago, this is not the Arthur we just saw last May. We had Hurricane Arthur, Category 2 storm, pretty similar, landfall by Cape Lookout. And again, to the right of the storm is the strongest winds usually. So if you lived on the Outer Banks, you probably remember this one. Here in Carteret County, the strongest winds were Morehead City east. Here in the western part of the county, 40, 50 mile per hour winds. Probably didn't really remember this. Same landfall. It was a Category 2 storm. Fast moving, very small storm. Do you remember Hurricane Irene? Most of us remember that if we were here in 2011. It was just a 1 though, so it was a whole category lower on the scale. Same location, no trickery. It was near Cape Lookout, but the wind field was much larger because it was a larger storm. So our end of the county had 60, 65 mile per hour winds, but all the way up to ECU and Greenville had those strong winds. Slower moving, so we had 10 to 15 inches of rain and flooding. So to reiterate, category is only based on wind. Respect it. If it's a high category, obviously wind's going to be an issue, but it's just part of the puzzle. Please focus on all of the threats, including rainfall, rip currents, storm surge, and last but not least, tornado threat. This was Hurricane Dorian, EF2 tornado. These tornadoes are common with any landfalling system, not just a hurricane. It could be a depression, a tropical storm, because if you watch it on satellite or radar, it's naturally spinning. And those, especially those outer bands, can produce tornadoes. What's bad about that is, most of us, unless you're in Ocracoke or Emerald Isle, Dorian wasn't really a big deal. But that's a big deal to the park of homes by Salty Pirate. It was a big deal for them, obviously. So it can produce enhanced areas of damage. They often occur really quickly. So if you decide to stay, have your phone on, have your weather radio, and be able to get into the lower level of your home away from windows quickly, because you're not going to have a long time of warning ahead of these. And the other thing is they occur well away from the center itself. This was the first band of rain that moved on shore. So we're waiting for Dorian. It was still another 12 to 18 hours, I think, until it even got up here. And right away, Onslow County, Carteret County, we had multiple reports of tornadoes. So please pay attention to that. This graphic really backs up what we mean by focus on all of the impacts and the whole storm itself, not just where the landfall is either. This is a landfall of Florence down by Wrightsville Beach. Look at all these dots. This is up toward Richmond. Multiple tornadoes days later. And of course, we had a lot across eastern North Carolina. So impacts can occur well away from the center. Don't just think because landfall's not near you, that's not going to be a big deal. The last point I'm going to end on, and then Zach is going to turn his camera back on and we'll field any questions. I'll start looking for those, is we're doing a really good job with storm surge. Those deaths have been down. We need to work on the water, especially in vehicles. And the other area that where we can improve our messaging is after the storm. Be extremely careful as you head back to your home and you start cleaning up. That means don't go around barricades. Don't travel through closed roads. Don't be in a rush to get back here that you've done all this preparing and you've done all this planning and then you lose your life at the end, especially with regards to carbon monoxide. A lot of us have generators because we want to have power during the storm, and that's an important thing, especially if you have folks that need that for healthcare reasons. You need electricity. Please, please, please know how to use a generator. Don't use it in a garage. Don't use it in an enclosed space. We have a lot of issues with carbon monoxide deaths. 16 of our 34 deaths with Hurricane Laura were from carbon monoxide. And in fact, in the last 4 years, we've lost more people to carbon monoxide deaths than storm surge. So it's really, really good with storm surge messaging. Folks are getting the warnings, they're evacuating, we're doing a great job. Don't let your guard down. Something as simple as putting the generator in the garage and not having ventilation. And this is just an example of other indirect deaths, being careful on a ladder, safety tips to not cause injury or death after the storm's gone and you're doing cleanup. So that is it on our end. Zach will turn on his camera here in a second. I'll sift through the questions. We'll go over some things and then we'll wrap things up. If you have any questions, you just joined us. We had a lot of folks that signed up that weren't able to make it, and you want to share this information with a neighbor, we will make a recording of this. I'll post it on YouTube and I will email you the link. So you don't have to do anything. You don't have to write anything down. Just look at your email tomorrow for that link. Do us a favor. Share it on your Facebook page. Share it on social media. If you thought this was good information, share this with others. If you want other talks like these, I know we're still struggling with COVID and things in the community. We do talks. We a lot of virtual now, but we do in person. Eventually, once we get back to doing more things, we have tours of the office. We're in your community. Contact us, eric.hayden@noaa.gov. We do school talks, church talks, the whole gamut. So if that's anything you would be interested in, please go ahead and contact me. So at this point, Zach, I'm going to turn off my presentation. You can turn your camera back on, and we'll see if we've got any questions from the audience. If not, we'll kind of wrap things up. So let's see here. All right, so it'll just be us on camera for now, Zach. Let's see. So again, if you have any questions, while we wait for the questions to come in, I'm going to ask a couple poll questions just to get some people responding. So the first question, this will pop up on your, however you're watching, whether it's a mobile device or your computer. Just a couple questions of the audience, and you just hit yes or no. Is your hurricane kit complete? And we won't track you, so you can answer honestly, but it looks like 100% so far are yes. So I'll show those results. So that's certainly good. You as you get into September, you certainly want that to be complete, but if you haven't yet, it's okay. It's still not too late. It's never really too late for your kit, but the sooner the better. The thing you don't want to do is you don't want to wait until the last moment when we're out of supplies at the store. So things like water, things like that go out. If there's a storm in the tropics, make sure you're gassed up. Things like that you're not running out on E before a storm itself. So this next one is: do you know if you live in a vulnerable area? So like Longboat Sound, maybe the White Oak River. It's important to know that, and it's important to know just because Florence or Irene didn't do a lot of issues to you, you can still be vulnerable. I know some areas that I toured in Swansboro were hit harder with Irene. Each storm is different, so just because you haven't had issues in the past doesn't mean you won't. But knowing your elevation, you can find it on Google Earth. Looking at those maps that Zach showed with regards to hurricane surge and things like that, very, very important. So we'll close this poll. So it's about a 50-50 split on that. So that's kind of homework for you now to see, do you live in a vulnerable area? Is that something you need to pay a little more close attention to? So that's good there. And we got one more, Zach, and then we'll see if we got any questions. Last one is, do you have a plan to leave the area? and one that includes pets. So some shelters, you know, a lot won't